And Green Party co-leader and Climate Change Minister James Shaw joins us now from Parliament. Minister, 10% reduction in agricultural methane over 10 years. What did you pitch for?
Well, I pitched for the science that gets us to 1.5 degrees of global warming or keeps us within that envelope. I mean, that is the single most important thing, and that's in the purpose of the Act. So
was the 10% reduction what you started negotiations with?
No, if you go back and take a look at the document that we consulted on last year, there were a range of options which included net zero carbon dioxide only, then split gases target, and also net zero all gases.
Sorry, I'm actually asking what you wanted. So as co-leader of the Greens, what would you have liked to see? 10% reduction, is that enough in 10 years, in your view?
Yes, it is, because that's what the science tells us gets us to that temperature goal of staying within 1.5 degrees of global warming. So what I wanted was a bill, the purpose of which was to keep New Zealand within that envelope. And it is one of the first pieces of legislation in the world that codifies that goal of staying within 1.5 degrees in primary legislation.
Because you'll be aware that some interest groups, including Forest and Bird, while they think it's a little bit unambitious, they say that 91% of submitters called for net zero gases as a target for all. So why didn't you listen to them, the submitters?
Well, we did listen to them, but we were also saying, well, what does the science tell us? And we were also looking at what are the kind of economic effects that are distributed across the economy. And essentially where we landed was what is required to keep within that 1.5 degree envelope, and the sort of burden sharing, I guess, across the economy in terms of who needs to do what in order to get us there. Now,
so
you'll notice that on the other side, of course, the agricultural sector are saying that they think that the target that's been put in there is actually too ambitious. So I think that where we've landed does meet the science. That is the most important thing, and it does say, look, we all have a role to play, and we've got a collective responsibility to support those sectors that do face significant change through that transition.
And we'll get to the farmers in a minute, but basically you're saying this was the minimum required to reach that 1.5 degree target. So you could have gone big and bold, couldn't you? You could have done more than the minimum. Why didn't you?
Well, because then we would be doing more than we had to stay within the 1.5 degrees, and it would come at significant cost to particular parts of the economy. So you would be, if you did want to go that far down the route, you would be closing down large sections of the countryside. You would be shutting down rural communities. You would be reducing food production, and frankly, that was a toll that we weren't prepared to take. The Paris Agreement itself says that we have to make this transition without sacrificing food production, because we do have a growing population on planet Earth and they need feeding.
So how are you going to enforce what you have got here?
Well, I mean, the bill has a number of accountability mechanisms in it. I'm familiar with the comments that Dr. Russell Norman made this afternoon about enforceability. The issue is that, let's say that there's a climate change minister in the year 2040, and we miss the emissions budget for the year 2040. Well, that climate change minister can't have done much about that, because the decisions that would lead to missing the budget in 2040 would have been made many years before that minister was in office. So that person can't be held accountable for missing the target. But the person who made the decisions in the first place, some decades previously, can be through the provisions that are in the bill.
Yeah, in what way? Just a slap across the wrist from the courts declaring that you've failed to meet your targets. That's it, isn't it? In terms of comeback?
I mean, that is pretty significant, because what it says to the government is actually, you've got it wrong, you need to go away and do your homework. So, for example, if the Climate Change Commission says, look, here's what your emissions budget needs to be for this period, and the government doesn't listen to that advice, then they can be taken to court for that and have that overturned.
But all the court will do is make a declaration. It can't force you to do anything. It just tells you failed to meet the targets.
No, that's true, and that's because when we were consulting last year, I started with the model that was kind of more akin to, I guess, the Reserve Bank, if you like, where the Commission would have significant independent decision-making power. I have to say the overwhelming feedback that we got from the public was that they wanted to make sure that this was a parliamentary process, and that is because, and certainly in the submissions that I read, people said, look, the distributive impact of this, or the decisions that can be made, are so significant, it really does need to be taken by the House of Representatives.
So let's go back to the farmers then, because they're saying that this is frustratingly cruel, these targets, if indeed the technology that we think is coming that will help them doesn't turn up in time. So what are you going to do to assist them?
Well, there's a range of measures, some of which will be announced later this year. But the key thing the key thing that the industry has said would be most useful to them was assistance in putting in place integrated farm plans, because, as they said, farmers actually want to do this. The issue is that most of them don't have the information that they need about what's the situation on their own farm and what their farm what their options are for their farm, given the different conditions around the country. So that's at the top of the list. We've also started, as of last year, extension services to support farmers with additional information and so on. To Caroline Mortlock, her point from Fonterra about increased funding for research and development, she's absolutely right. We've actually doubled our commitment over the next 2 years for research and development, and we will be doing a great deal more in the R&D space.
So the reality is the farmers will get all of this assistance from you, and they still won't have to pull their weight in this, will they? Others are going to be carrying more of the can than farmers are. It's
incorrect to say that they won't be pulling their weight. They absolutely will.
How can you say that?
Well, because all of the advice that I have had says that in order for us to stay within that limit, every sector has to do its part. Agriculture is one of those sectors, and they've got 3 sets of emissions to look after. They've got carbon dioxide, they've got nitrous oxide, and they've got methane, and they've got to work across all 3 of those. There are other sectors that also face significant transitions. I keep quoting the steel mill, who have got to get their emissions down to net zero in 30 years, and currently there is no technology on the horizon that they can substitute. So there is significant innovation and R&D that has to happen in the economy over the course of the next 30 years. Malcolm Johns from Christchurch Airport pointed to that in his comments this afternoon.
Appreciate you joining us this evening. That's Green Party co-leader and the Climate Change Minister, James Shaw.